Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Marlena Frank. I write young adult fantasy and horror books, everything from short fiction to novellas. And today I wanted to talk with you about basically my journey at becoming a self-published author. So I have written short stories, short fiction, for a while now. I think I had my first paid publication back in 2010. And it was kind of an on and off thing because I wanted to write longer pieces, because I did write longer pieces at the time, but I just couldn't find a way to get them picked up. I had my first novella, my solo title, published in 2018 by Radiant Crown Publishing, The She-Wolf of Kanta, which is available now. I also had my Stolen trilogy picked up by Parliament House Publishing in 2019, and did a fantastic job with that. They also picked up The Seeking, which was also a standalone piece at the time. So Stolen was released in 2019. This is the original cover that it was given. And then over the next couple of years, there was a Broken, which came out in 2020. Oof. I think it came out right around March, if I remember right. The Seeking came out in fall of 2020. Oof, that was gonna be my big release year for having 2 books out. It was 2020. And then Chosen came out in spring of 2021, and it was a really great experience to finally be picked up by a small press and to have that community and to go through the whole editing galley process with all of the books, and then ultimately the publishing house reorganized. And suddenly all 4 of these books came back into my ownership. And, in that time, before these had all been handed back to me, I had dipped a toe in self-publishing. I had self-published The Impostor and Other Dark Tales. And this had come out in September of 2021. And the cover, who was by the amazing artist, sinsvalentine.com. She painted all of this for the whole cover. Just gorgeous work. And my sister over at Morbid Smile Art, she did all the lettering as well for this whole thing. Just, again, fantastic work. And so I kind of had some experience with self-publishing, but I hadn't expected to have all 4 books landing back in my lap. And because they were all taken out of course, off the storefronts and everything. And so then I was stuck with, okay, I've got to get these turned around fairly quickly, because I go to cons all year round. I'm doing panels, promoting my books and all of that thing. I'm in the Atlanta area, so that's a big way of being an author down here, is doing panels, connecting with other authors, talking to readers directly. It's a wonderful experience, but I suddenly didn't have any books that were that were published except my Impostor book, and that was wild. So they gave me back the covers for the books that they had, and they were all pretty flat covers, especially the early one, Stolen. I didn't have a lot to work with as far as this went. I wanted a smaller form factor. This is a 5x8. And it was really hard to kind of change it because the layers were fairly flat on the first one. So we had to go through, and my sister and I, again, Morbid Smile Art, did a fantastic job for me. She did the lettering for all 3 books in this new trilogy. I figured out how to, create a back image for these books and figure out the spine and the printing and everything with Ingram Spark. And ever since we had this whole process we went through, suddenly, this is a hardback as well. I publish hardbacks and paperbacks, especially for these series books. And suddenly we were stuck in a situation where we had to do all this in a fairly short amount of time. We just had a few months where we had to focus on this, and thankfully my mailing list subscribers really pitched in. My Ko-Fi supporters really helped out a lot too. And it was just kind of, rough. And, I've worked with some really great small presses, and I've worked with some small presses that haven't been great. And, some of them are like, oh, okay, it's a little not great. But some of them, not the ones I've mentioned, are like, oof, oh boy. So it's kind of it's rough out there in the small press world. And I've heard of, Parliament House couldn't help with the reorganization that they were doing, which was a whole different thing. But this is what happens when you're an author. And unless you're with like a big 5 publisher, you're going to be likely with a small press or a mid-level press. And if you're going the traditional route. Once I had done research on how to do self-publishing, and all of this was suddenly back in my control, in my, wheelhouse again, I went through and figured out how to do this. I had lurked for years on Facebook groups like Wide for the Win, which was fantastic, and I'll put a link to them below. A wonderful group to follow, and they have a load of resources out there. But it takes time, and it takes work, and it takes, learning a lot of things. And there's an investment aspect with this too. I use, for example, Vellum with all of my covers, which is a Mac specific software. So I do all my formatting, my interior formatting is all through Vellum. So it really makes it so much easier to do stuff. So yeah, and I use Vellum, and then I use Ingram Spark for printing, which I know some people like to do Amazon as well, or use one of the offshoots like Barnes & Noble, for example, which is kind of still using Ingram Spark for those as well. So that's my preference. Everyone has their own preference when it comes to being a self-published author. Once I started and suddenly had like 5 books that were then underneath my name, I was like, I can just self-publish my own books now. And once I did that, there was a certain level of freedom that came with it. I got insight into, I could handle pricing all on my own. I could see which books were selling well and which ones weren't. It just really gives you a lot more clarity into how things are going. Now, would I have started out self-publishing? I don't know, because I learned a lot with being with those small presses. I learned what to do and what not to do with being with small presses. That was a very useful time for me as an author. It was really good for my, especially getting started, because I was so overwhelmed. But that was good for me. Now, for you, it might be different. If this is something that you're trying to figure out, do I want to self-publish or not? You do get a lot more clarity into things and control over things, like being able to get artists to come in and paint for your cover. Now, the problem is that it's up to you with marketing. It's up to you to do all of these things, but a lot of people would argue that that's the same thing you've got to do with big 5 publishers too, is go out there and be at conventions and things. Now, I do a lot of local cons in Atlanta. I was just at Conjuration last weekend, and I was on probably like 10 panels, and there were some that were on writing craft, but a lot of it was like fandom panels. I was a panelist at Broadleaf earlier this year. It's a conference as well in Atlanta, which is fantastic, that works mostly with craft and helping authors getting started. So, that's one way of going out there and doing things is, once you're an author, you can apply to do a lot of these things, and then you get invited to things. Like I was invited to be a panelist at Broadleaf, but I had to apply to be a panelist at Conjuration. And you're more likely to get accepted once you start doing panels, once you start getting to know people there, and they're like, oh yeah, that person can talk about these things and has something useful to say to folks. They bring a wealth of knowledge that can help, beginning authors and things. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of talk about my journey over here with you, because this is stuff I talk all day long at panels about, but it's nice to also have that outside of like the microcosm of where I live, to share that out with other people who might be struggling with this stuff and might be questioning which path is the best for them. I did try to go the traditional path for a couple of years. I pitched around my stolen book, and I pitched around my Colton Fenn book 1. I'll do another video all about that one. But I had tried with both of those books for a while, and I didn't get any real interest with agents, and that was really heartbreaking for me. I stopped writing for a while because I just didn't know if this was for me at the time. And then when I decided to not keep beating my head against a wall trying to find, an agent that would be interested in my style of writing, and I went out and I actually tried with small presses, and I got in with some great small presses that gave me the experience that I needed. Suddenly I was able to be like, oh, I can do this. I don't need to be, trying year after year trying to do stuff. Back when Query Tracker was a great website to use, I think it's been closed now, but you would have comments in there from people who would let you know, okay, this is the date I queried this agent. This is, the time it took them to get an automated response back to let them know it was received. This was the time it took for me to actually get a response back from the agent, whether it was canned or whether it was personal. Like a canned response, not canned manuscript. Whether it was a canned response or if it was like a personal response. And, it was kind of sad because I would see some people I'd recognize their names from querying, and I'd go in and check a few years later and they'd have been querying for 5 years trying to find an agent. And that's just, it's heartbreaking as an author, because I have so many stories I wanted to tell. And I just felt so limited by the process that was. And I don't have a formal training in writing. My background is in computer science, so it was, very easy for me to feel like I was inadequate for this field. And now that I have had my books out there and I've talked with people who've loved my books and I've talked with other authors, I realize that's not the case. The gatekeeping that happens, unfortunately, in the traditional publishing industry can really be soul-sucking. And, you have to figure out, okay, maybe your audience isn't that. Maybe your audience is different from that. Maybe your readers are not as far away as you think they are. And realizing that you have a story that you can tell, you have a world that you want to share, and realizing that there are other options. For me, self-publishing has been a real breakthrough in what I can do. I have full control of my writing schedule. I have full control over my, my public appearances. And it's a lot to manage. It's tough. Marketing online, that stuff is a whole thing too. But I still say, going out in person and doing things is one of the best ways to get your name out there, get your books out there, get to know people, and just talking to readers and sharing your worlds and your words with them. So that's my advice. If you are in a similar situation where you're afraid of continuing writing, or maybe writing isn't for you and you're trying to go the traditional route, maybe look at other options. Maybe consider self-publishing. It's not that difficult to do if you are willing to put in the time and the effort and maybe an investment in it. Definitely look at becoming a small business for yourself, and take the time to do the research. Even if you're just like I did, I lurked in that Facebook group for a long time and just passively absorbed a lot of information, and that helped me quite a bit whenever I finally decided to jump off and try this self-publishing experiment, which I think has been going really well for me. So that's what I have to share today. I hope this video has helped you. I hope this has given you some hope with regards to where your writing is and where you are as an author. And if you enjoyed this, please give me a like, a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this with your friends. And I hope to see you back here soon. Again, I'm going to try to start doing these videos more regularly, so this won't be like a once every few years kind of video. But yes, thank you for being here. Like and subscribe. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you later. Bye.